Ukraine has admitted it blew up a vital bridge that links Crimea to Russian-occupied Kherson region of Ukraine. Russia's installed leader of Kherson says that the missile caused little damage, but it knocked the bridge out of commission and hit a gas pipeline. It's not the first time the bridge has been targeted. It was struck last week and the week before. Russia says the bridge was struck by Storm Shadow missiles given to Ukraine by the British. And we're getting some readout from the peace talks being held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. China is said to be in support of a third round of talks. Some 40 countries came to Saudi Arabia, not invited Russia at all. Joining me now live is Velina Tchakarova. She is the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. She's joining me now from Vienna. Thanks so much for joining us, Velina. So it seems as though we weren't really expecting them to finish this weekend saying, yes, we've now come together with a peace agreement, because Russia wasn't even invited.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm no longer director at the IAS. Meanwhile, actually geopolitical strategist at FACE, my own geopolitical consultancy. This event is critically important because of the presence of India and China, which will be communicating to Moscow. So yes, of course, Russia is not present. That means that this is not an initial phase of any peace process. But it is important because we have a lot of critical representatives from the global south, and obviously Saudi Arabia is taking a similar role as the one that Turkey took while practically negotiating the grain initiative between Ukraine and Russia in cooperation with the United Nations. So the key message here is that the global south wants a peace deal. Why? Because of the repercussions, the geoeconomic repercussions from the war. And obviously China and India are currently the two important international partners that are able to not only communicate to also probably to somehow convince Russia to, come to the negotiation table. But in the end, we all know that the military outcome from the current counteroffensive by Ukraine, and obviously also the success of Russia to stall this counteroffensive, is going to be the most decisive element before we see clear, let's say, path towards a negotiation process, which we probably will witness in October, November, not early than that.
So, Velina, if it's the case with the global south being so interested in this, why was Saudi Arabia so necessary to take the leadership position in this as opposed to, let's say, the UN or the EU or anyone else?
As you have been certainly observing, currently the Middle East, which is meanwhile described as West Asia, for the obvious nexus to the most important epicenter of global power competition, but also global economic growth, which will be taking place in Asia, in Southeast Asia, is increasing its geopolitical and geoeconomic portfolio with all the, let's say, the geopolitical rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. A lot of positive developments are taking place right now in this region. And Saudi Arabia is practically a significant regional player that tries to somehow, let's say, capitalize on a quite good relationship with Moscow on the one hand, but at the very same time has been a significant contributor of humanitarian aid to Ukraine on the other hand. And obviously the Middle East is also negatively affected from, as I said, the geoeconomic repercussions from the ongoing war. Think of skyrocketing commodities prices last year. So they want to avoid such scenario, because this scenario will be also destabilizing the Middle East. So in a sense, there is a lot of opportunities right now to not just hedge for the own sake, but in fact to prevent similar worst-case scenario as the one we saw last year.
So, Velina, but right now it looks as though Russia really isn't even interested in coming to the table. I mean, there is now, from what we've been seeing at reports out of Ukraine today, that there's been stepped-up missile attacks by Russia into Ukraine. That today has been nothing but a barrage of missiles from Russia. So it sounds as though that Russia has no interest whatsoever in any of this.
That's correct. As I said, right now we're in a very critical phase of the ongoing war of attrition. Ukraine is preparing for the most important stage of its counteroffensive, but Russia still has, as we've seen, a lot to offer in terms of missile attacks on critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, but also along the front lines. And that means that both Ukraine and Russia still are still convinced that they can actually decide the war by military means. That is why, as I've outlined, we are going to see the first real steps towards any negotiations. And that means, of course, Russia and Ukraine coming together to the negotiation table not early than October, November. Why? Because the political pressure from outside, specifically from the United States, from Europe, that means the West, and because we know that the West is the key provider of military aid to Ukraine, is going to exercise such pressure on Ukraine. But also, we are increasingly observing the pressure coming from the global South on Russia because of the geoeconomic dimension of the warfare. So both are going to happen simultaneously. More, unfortunately, military conflict, but also more efforts towards peace.